There was a man who was supposed to be the Messiah, groomed from childhood to be the world teacher, the new Buddha, the one who would save humanity from itself. Thousands gathered to hear him speak. Disciples waited at his feet. Organizations were built in his name. And then on August 3, 1929, he stood before 6,000 people and dissolved the entire organization created for him, rejected the role of guru, and told them something that would echo through the decades. Truth is a pathless land. His name was Jiddu Krishnamurti, and what he did next would challenge everything humanity believed about spirituality, authority, and the search for meaning. Most spiritual teachers build empires. Krishnamurti dismantled the one built for him. Most gurus collect followers. He told people to follow no one, not even him. Most enlightened beings claim to have found the truth. He said truth cannot be found, only discovered moment by moment in the mirror of relationship. These aren't just contradictions. They're invitations to a revolution so profound that most people miss it entirely while looking for it. If you've been searching for answers, collecting techniques, following teachers, trying to become something other than what you are, what you're about to hear will either liberate you completely or disturb you so deeply you'll want to stop listening. Because Krishnamurti's central teaching is this: the observer is the observed, the thinker is the thought, and the very act of seeking is what prevents you from finding. In a world drowning in self-help programs and spiritual marketplaces, here was a man who spent 70 years saying the same thing in 1,000 different ways. You are the problem, and you are the solution, and there is no distance between the two. The story begins not with Krishnamurti the teacher, but with Krishnamurti the boy, discovered on a beach in India in 1909 by Charles Webster Leadbeater, a high-ranking member of the Theosophical Society. Leadbeater claimed to possess clairvoyant abilities, and he declared that this malnourished, often beaten child had the most magnificent aura he had ever seen, without a particle of selfishness in it. The boy was adopted by the society, taken from his father, educated in England, and prepared for a destiny that had been chosen for him before he could speak a word about it. Imagine being told from age 14 that you are the vehicle for the Lord Maitreya, that the Christ consciousness will manifest through you, that millions will be saved through your words. Imagine the weight of that expectation, the construction of an identity built entirely on other people's projections and mystical visions. For nearly 20 years, young Krishnamurti was sculpted, refined, worshipped, and imprisoned by the very people who claimed to love him. But something happened during those years of preparation. While everyone was busy creating the world teacher, the real question was forming inside the boy. Who am I when all these labels are stripped away? What remains when authority is questioned? What is true when all belief is removed? The breaking point came after a profound mystical experience Krishnamurti had in 1922, a process he called the process, involving intense physical pain and altered states of consciousness. But unlike most people who have spiritual experiences and then spend the rest of their lives trying to recapture them or build religions around them, Krishnamurti moved in the opposite direction. He saw that the experience itself wasn't the point. The transformation wasn't in the mystical state, but in the fundamental change in how consciousness operated. And so, 7 years later, standing before thousands of devoted followers, he committed what the spiritual establishment considered an unforgivable act. He dissolved the Order of the Star, the organization with thousands of members created to prepare the world for his teaching. I maintain that truth is a pathless land, he said, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. He rejected the role of guru. He refused the title of world teacher. He gave back the properties, the money, everything. He told them not to follow him. He said that the moment you follow someone, you cease to follow truth. Can you imagine the shock, the cognitive dissonance? People had given their lives, their money, their devotion to this organization. And here was their Messiah telling them it was all a lie, that they needed to stand alone, that no one could give them truth, that all authority in spiritual matters was false. Most people didn't understand. They couldn't, because understanding Krishnamurti requires a radical shift in the entire structure of thinking, and most people aren't willing to make that shift. They want comfort, certainty, a path to follow, a technique to practice, a goal to achieve. Krishnamurti offered none of that. He offered only a mirror. His first great teaching, the one that runs through everything else like a river through a landscape, is about the observer and the observed. When you look at a tree, he would say, there is you and the tree, the observer and the observed, the subject and the object. And this division seems natural, seems like the way reality is structured. But when you look at yourself, when you observe your own anger or fear or jealousy, is there actually a division between the observer and the observed? You say, I am angry. But is there an I separate from the anger? Or is the I itself a creation of thought, a fiction that thought has invented to give itself continuity? When you look closely, without the filter of past knowledge, without the interference of the observer who is trying to control or change what is observed, you discover something extraordinary. The observer is the observed. The thinker is the thought. The experiencer is the experience. This isn't philosophy. This isn't a concept to believe in. This is something to be discovered directly, and the discovery changes everything. Because if the observer is the observed, then there is no one to control the anger, no one to suppress it or express it or transform it. There is only anger, arising and dissolving in consciousness, without the observer who tries to manipulate it. And in that observation without the observer, something happens that Krishnamurti called transformation. Not the transformation that the self achieves through effort and time, but transformation that happens when the self is absent. People would ask him, how do I get rid of my anger? How do I become less fearful? How do I achieve enlightenment? And he would dismantle the question itself. The how implies a method, a path, a systematic approach. But the I who is asking how is itself the problem. The I is the accumulated past, the bundle of memories and experiences and conditioning that is trying to become something other than what it is. And that movement of becoming is the source of all conflict. The moment you have a formula, he said, you are not understanding. When you follow a system, there is no understanding. Because systems and formulas are mechanical. They belong to thought, to time, to the progressive movement from here to there. But truth, if such a word means anything, is not the result of a process. It cannot be cultivated like a crop or built like a house. It is only discovered in the immediate, in the now that is not touched by the past. Here's where it gets dangerous, where most people's minds start to rebel. Krishnamurti said that all psychological time is an illusion created by thought. Physical time exists. You can't plant a seed and harvest it the next day. But psychological time, the idea that I am this now, but I will become that tomorrow, is a fiction. There is only what is, and what is constantly changing. The I that tries to change is itself part of what is, and therefore cannot change it any more than a hand can grasp itself. This means that all self-improvement, all spiritual practice aimed at becoming better, becoming enlightened, becoming free, is actually perpetuating the prison. Because the entity that is trying to become free is itself the bondage. People found this unbearable. They wanted practices. They wanted meditation techniques. They came to him and said, tell us what to do. And he would say, the moment I tell you what to do, I become your authority and you stop questioning, you stop discovering. You merely follow, and following is not understanding. He did talk about meditation, but not as a practice, not as something you do for 20 minutes in the morning to achieve peace. He described meditation as the total attention to what is, without choice, without judgment, without the movement of thought trying to grasp or avoid. Meditation, in his understanding, is the natural state of a mind that is completely awake, not pursuing experience, not trying to achieve a state. Can you observe without the observer? He would ask. Can you look at a tree without the word tree, without the botanical knowledge, without the like or dislike, without the whole movement of thought? Can you just look? This simple-sounding question is actually devastating. Because when you try it, you discover that you cannot. The mind is so conditioned to name, to judge, to compare, to interpret, that pure observation seems impossible. And yet, Krishnamurti insisted, only in that pure observation and that attention without the observer is there freedom. His second great teaching was about fear and the ending of sorrow. Most people try to escape from fear through various means: entertainment, relationships, beliefs, drugs, spiritual experiences. Or they try to suppress fear, or understand it intellectually, or gradually overcome it through courage and will. Krishnamurti said all of these approaches are still within the field of fear, because they all assume the existence of an entity separate from the fear who is trying to deal with it. But if the observer is the observed, if the I is not separate from the fear, then what happens when you completely observe fear without numbing it, without trying to escape from it or understand it? When you give it total attention, not the attention that thought gives, which is always partial, but the attention that comes when the mind is utterly still. He worked with people for hours on this, not giving them theories but helping them to actually look at their fear, their anger, their jealousy, with complete attention. And when that attention was present, something extraordinary happened. The thing being observed would dissolve, not through effort, not through time, but instantaneously, because it existed only in the division between the observer and the observed. This is why he said that the ending of sorrow is possible, not tomorrow, not through a gradual process of spiritual development, but now, immediately, when there is complete attention to sorrow without the observer who is separate from it, who has an opinion about it, who wants to get rid of it. But here's the paradox that drove people mad. You cannot practice this. The moment you try to practice complete attention, you've already created the division between the practicer and the practice. You've made it into a method, a technique, something that thought can manipulate and control. And thought, Krishnamurti insisted, is always the past. Thought is memory, knowledge, experience. Thought has its proper place in the technological world, in daily functional living, but thought cannot possibly understand or grasp that which is beyond time. Love, he said, is not the product of thought. You cannot cultivate love through practice any more than you can practice humility. The moment you practice humility, you're cultivating the image of being humble, which is the opposite of humility. Real humility happens when the self is absent, when there's no image being cultivated. Similarly, love is not desire, not attachment, not the continuation of pleasure or the avoidance of pain. Love is something entirely different, something that flowers only in freedom, when the mind is no longer caught in the movement of becoming, when there is no observer trying to possess or hold on to love. Can the mind be completely still? He asked. Not made still, not disciplined into stillness, but still because it sees the truth that any movement of thought in the direction of experiencing love is not love at all. His third great teaching, woven through everything, was about freedom. Not freedom as an ideal, not freedom as something to be achieved at the end of a long path of spiritual practice, but freedom now, freedom from the known. Because the known is the past, the accumulated content of consciousness, your experiences, your knowledge, your beliefs, your memories, all of which form the prison of the self. Most people live entirely in the known. They think according to their conditioning. They react according to their past. They interpret the present through the filter of what they already know. And then they wonder why life feels mechanical, repetitive, dead. It's because they're living from memory, not from the immediacy of what is. Freedom, Krishnamurti said, begins with the awareness of your conditioning. Not trying to change it, not trying to be free from it, but simply seeing it completely. And he meant seeing it not as an idea, not as information about yourself, but seeing it directly, the way you see a snake on the path. When you see a snake, you don't think about it, you don't analyze it, you don't try to overcome your fear of it. You simply see it, and the very act of seeing is action. Similarly, when you see your conditioning completely, without judgment, without the desire to be free from it, the very act of seeing is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom for the self, but freedom from the self. Because the self is the product of conditioning, the accumulation of thought identifying with memories and experiences and calling it I. He spoke about relationship as the mirror in which we see ourselves clearly. You are the world and the world is you, he would say. This is not a philosophical statement but an observable fact. Your consciousness is the consciousness of humanity. Your fear, your greed, your ambition, your sorrow, these are not personally yours. They belong to the whole of mankind. This understanding changes everything. Because if your consciousness is not separate from the consciousness of humanity, then working on yourself for your own salvation, your own enlightenment, your own peace, is a selfish, isolating activity that actually perpetuates the division and conflict in the world. Real revolution, Krishnamurti insisted, is not changing the external world, not reorganizing society or economics or politics, although those things may have their place. Real revolution is the radical transformation of consciousness itself, and that transformation is not individual. It's not you becoming enlightened while the rest of the world suffers. It's the ending of the very consciousness that divides the world into me and you, us and them, my country and your country, my religion and your religion. People would ask him, "What is the purpose of your teaching? What are you trying to achieve?" And he would say he wasn't trying to achieve anything. He wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. He was simply pointing out what is. Whether you see it or not is entirely your concern, not his. This attitude frustrated many people. They wanted him to care about their progress, to guide them, to assure them they were on the right path, but he refused to play that role. "You are responsible for yourself," he would say. "Not to me, not to some authority, not to some God, but to yourself, and that responsibility cannot be transferred or shared." His teaching on education was revolutionary. He said that most education is merely the transmission of information, the cultivation of memory, the preparation of the individual to fit into society and earn a living. But real education is the understanding of the totality of life, not just how to make a living, but how to live. And how to live includes understanding fear, understanding sorrow, understanding relationship, understanding the movement of thought and consciousness. He started schools based on these principles, where students were encouraged to question everything, including the authority of the teacher, where the emphasis was not on accumulation of knowledge but on observation, on inquiry, on the flowering of intelligence. Not the intelligence that can solve technical problems, but the intelligence that sees the whole, that perceives the false as false immediately, without the process of reasoning and conclusion. Can we create a space, he asked educators, where the student is not being molded, not being shaped according to an ideology or a system, but is learning about himself, about the whole movement of life? Because if the student leaves school without understanding fear, without understanding ambition, without understanding greed, then what good is all the knowledge we've given him? He'll simply perpetuate the same patterns, the same conflicts, the same misery that have plagued humanity for millennia. In his dialogues with scientists, physicists, and psychologists, Krishnamurti explored the nature of consciousness, the observer and the observed, the question of whether the brain can ever be free from its conditioning. He spoke with David Bohm, the renowned quantum physicist, about the nature of thought, time, and the ending of psychological suffering. These dialogues revealed a mind that was not bound by any field of knowledge, that could engage with the most complex scientific concepts while maintaining a simplicity and directness that cut through abstraction to the essential. Thought has created tremendous things in the world, he acknowledged. Technology, medicine, communication. But thought has also created division, the division between nations, between religions, between human beings. Thought has created the me and the not me, and from this division arises all conflict. So can there be an end to the movement of thought in the psychological realm, while retaining thought's function in the practical world? This question occupied him for decades, not as a theoretical inquiry but as a direct exploration. Can the brain, which has evolved through millennia to think, to calculate, to remember, to protect itself through knowledge. Can such a brain ever be free from the tyranny of thought? His answer was not a conclusion but an invitation to observe. Don't believe me, he would say. Don't accept what I'm saying. Observe yourself. Look at the movement of your own thinking. See how thought creates the thinker, how it divides experience into the experiencer and the experience, and from this division creates time, creates the illusion of continuity, creates the self that seems so real. And if you actually do this, if you observe without trying to achieve a result, without trying to become free from thought, you discover something that cannot be put into words. You discover that the observer itself is a creation of thought, that it has no independent existence, that it arises and subsides in consciousness like waves on the ocean. And when the observer is absent, when there is only pure observation, consciousness functions entirely differently. There is no division, no conflict, no becoming. There is only what is, in constant movement, in constant change, but without the artificial continuity that thought creates. As Krishnamurti grew older, his teaching deepened but never changed in its essence. He was still pointing to the same truth, still inviting people to see for themselves, still refusing to create a system or a philosophy or a following. He had no successor, no lineage, no transmission of authority. When he died in 1986 at the age of 90, there was no one to carry on his teaching in the traditional sense, because the teaching itself was anti-traditional. It was about ending, not about continuing. It was about dying to the known, not about accumulating more knowledge. His final message, recorded shortly before his death, was characteristically direct. The core of Krishnamurti's teaching is contained in the statement he made in 1929 when he said, "Truth is a pathless land. Man cannot come to it through any organization, through any creed, through any dogma, priest or ritual, not through any philosophical knowledge or psychological technique. He has to find it through the mirror of relationship, through the understanding of the contents of his own mind, through observation, and not through intellectual analysis or introspective dissection." What remains now? Decades after his death is the question: can a human being radically transform? Not improve, not gradually become better, not accumulate spiritual experiences and wisdom, but fundamentally transform the very structure of consciousness that creates division and conflict. Krishnamurti said yes, unequivocally yes. Not yes in the future, not yes after many years of practice, but yes now immediately, when there is complete attention to what is without the observer, without the thinker, without the movement of thought trying to grasp or escape. But he also said that very few people are willing to go that far, because it means the death of everything you know yourself to be. It means standing completely alone, not following anyone, not depending on any authority, not seeking comfort in any belief or system. It means living with tremendous insecurity, because all security is in the known, in the familiar, in the repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. And yet, he insisted, only in that aloneness, only in that freedom from the known, is there real security. Not the security that comes from accumulation of money, of relationships, of knowledge, of spiritual experiences, but the security of a mind that is completely open, completely vulnerable, completely alive. His teaching wasn't for the masses. He knew that. He wasn't trying to convert the world or create a movement. He was speaking to the individual who is serious about understanding the whole structure of suffering, who is willing to question everything, including the questioner. For such a person, Krishnamurti's teaching is like a lamp in darkness, not showing you where to go, but revealing what is. The final paradox of Krishnamurti is this: he spoke for 70 years, wrote dozens of books, gave thousands of talks, met with millions of people. And yet, if you truly understand what he's saying, you realize that nothing needs to be said. Because what he's pointing to is not in words, not in concepts, not in any formulation that thought can grasp. It's in the silence between the words, in the space where thought ends and observation begins. He once said that he could convey the entirety of his teaching in one sentence: There is no path to truth, and that is the beauty of it. Because if there were a path, truth would be static, dead, something that could be reached and possessed. But truth is alive, it's moving, it's the present moment stripped of all interpretation, all projection, all the movement of thought trying to capture it. So what do you do with all this? What action follows from understanding Krishnamurti? The answer is, no action that thought can plan or execute. Action in Krishnamurti's sense is not the result of thought, not the result of decision or choice. It's the immediate response of intelligence to what is, when the observer is absent, when there's no time gap between seeing and acting. When you see danger, you act instantly. You don't think about it, you don't decide to act, you don't choose between various courses of action. You simply act. That action is total, complete, without regret or fear because it's not born from thought. Similarly, when you see the truth of something, not intellectually, not as a concept, but directly the way you see a tree, action happens. Not your action, not the action of the self trying to become something, but action that is born from perception itself. This is why Krishnamurti emphasized the importance of looking, of observing, of giving complete attention. Because in that attention, the false is seen as false without any effort, and the seeing itself is the transformation. You don't have to then do something about what you've seen. The seeing itself is the doing. But this requires an extraordinary quality of mind, a mind that is not seeking a result, not trying to achieve enlightenment, not looking for confirmation or approval. It requires a mind that can stand completely alone, that has no psychological dependence on anyone or anything, that is not afraid of being nothing. And that perhaps is the most challenging aspect of Krishnamurti's teaching. We are so accustomed to being something, a successful person, a spiritual seeker, a knowledgeable individual, a loving parent, a good citizen. We derive our identity, our sense of existence from these roles and images. To be nothing, to have no image of ourselves at all, feels like death. But Krishnamurti said that only in that death is there real life. Not the life that is the continuation of the past, not the life that is the projection of the future, but the life that is totally present, totally new, totally free. In the end, what Krishnamurti offers is not comfort but challenge, not a method but a mirror, not a path but the ending of all paths. And perhaps that's exactly what humanity needs, not another guru promising salvation, not another system guaranteeing results, but someone who says, look, question, doubt, find out for yourself. Don't follow me. Don't follow anyone. Stand completely alone and discover what is true. Because that discovery, when it comes, is not your discovery. It's not something you possess or achieve. It's the discovery of what has always been, what is eternally present when the mind is not clouded by thought, when the observer is absent, when there is only pure observation, pure attention, pure being. And in that being there is no sorrow, no fear, no division. There is only life itself, moving, changing, dying, and being born in each moment. Never the same, never different, completely free.